Hey there, investors. This is Devin Moreno here, and today I wanted to talk about one of the best real estate investing strategies for new investors in this game of real estate. So a lot of you often want to buy a house, but then you have all the same problem, cash on hand. It's a big problem a lot of people have. Many people don't have enough money for that down payment. Well, what about buying a house for only 5% or even as little as 3.5%? In some cases, like mine, I did 100% down with a primary residency loan. This technique was brought on in large part by Bigger Pockets, another big channel, but for the most part, it's now talked about mainstream in the real estate investing world. But there's a lot of pitfalls they don't talk about, a lot of little details that you could run into. So today, I wanted to talk to you about the 7 details that you probably missed when you were considering a house hack. Now, as a person who owns 2 house hacks and about to buy another one the next 2 months, plus I manage 4 more house hacks on the side, and many of my friends own house hacks, I've seen at least 20 house hacks in the course of my investing journey here, and I'm obviously going to continue to see more. I love this strategy, and I mean, the thing is though, I've noticed a little bit of patterns here, and the most important one is probably within the location and the size of the house, and that gets us into our very first pitfall. So many of you are probably not thinking about the fact that your very first house hack will dictate the size and location of all the other house hacks you buy in the future. So this might sound a little bit surprising, but you have to remember that the bank thinks you're living in this property, or at least intend to for a long period of time. Now, they only really require you to live in the property for about 6 months to a year, depending on which loan lender you actually use. But what this means is that when you decide on a new house hack, a lot of times you have to make it make sense when you're moving from one location to the next. If you're moving just down the street, well, that's going to raise some red flags. Why would you just move down the street for your next primary residence? They're not really going to believe you, and they might even believe you're committing mortgage fraud, which is you don't actually intend to live in the property and you're using this as primarily an investment vehicle. So you want to stray away from that as much as possible. So moving down the street, or maybe even the same around location, may not actually work for you. Sometimes you have to move farther away from your original house hack, and that restricts you to where you can and cannot go. Also, the size of your house hack can be a determining factor. Keep in mind that if your first house hack is a duplex, and then your second house hack is a, let's say, single-family townhome, well, that makes sense. It looks like you're upgrading your living standards with your pay increases and your lifestyle. And let's say if you even go from a row home to a single-family detached home, once again, you're doing pretty well. But if you go in reverse, then suddenly that doesn't make any sense. If your first house is a 2,000 square foot single-family detached home, and then your second house you want to move into, even if further away, happens to be a duplex, well, now that raises red flags. Why would you suddenly move into a downgraded house? Most people are trying to improve their situation in life. So you can, once again, raise questions. Now, there's some easy ways around this. I mean, obviously, if any major status changes in your life happen, such as you get married, have kids, or move out of the area, maybe get a new job, then you can make up a new reason to get around some of this in some delicate ways, or creative ways, really, I should say. But just keep that in mind, that when I bought my first house hack, I got a 4,000 square foot, $400,000, massive townhome. And so what that meant was I couldn't then house hack a triplex. So I restricted myself on my very first house. So that's something I want you all to avoid, especially if you are investing in Baltimore City, where the locations where house hacks make sense are rather kind of slim. The next pitfall that some people run into is whether or not they're investing in rooming houses or in multifamily. Now, there are various other ways to invest in a house hack. Some use the Airbnb model, live and flip and such. We will go into those, but if you happen to be using the rooming house strategy, eventually you're going to want to get this house out of your name. There's a couple of reasons for that. Number one is you can only have 10 properties in your name at any one given time. So getting the house refinanced out of your name helps you alleviate not only your debt to income ratios, but also that 10 limit that you might have. So the thing is, though, refinancing a rooming house gets a little bit tricky. A lot of community banks who might refinance that house for you into your investment portfolio may be a little uncomfortable with rooming houses. There are some banks that still will accept rooming houses, but just be aware of that your options become far more limited if you choose the rooming house option. So, of course, there are some major advantages to rooming houses, which is the massive amounts of cash flow and the larger availability of single-family homes to multifamily. So I get why many of you want rooming houses. I personally chose that as my first one, and I'm going to do it again for my third one. But just note that when you have these rooming houses, you have limited your options on the refinance in the future. The next thing that people don't often think about with rooming houses is the layout. A lot of times the layout will determine your rental amount. So sometimes you might look up, okay, what are one bedrooms going for in an area? But the problem is that when you look this up on, let's say, Trulia or maybe even Zillow or any other place, you're not getting the price per square foot of that bedroom. You're not even getting certain determinant factors like how many people are sharing a bathroom, or is it a half-height ceiling, or, is there any light in the room of any sort? So these layouts will affect your rent prices, and you may not factor that in. If you have a brother-sister style bedroom where they're literally on top, next to each other, in most townhouses, this is actually very common. You might run into a situation where people don't want to be in a room right next to someone else where the only thing separating the noise between them is a piece of drywall. So you just have to be careful about that. Also, the more people who share a bathroom, the lower your rents become universally overall. Also, this will affect your tenancy turnover. I don't really talk about that as much, but tenancies can actually go as far as 3 years, which in my case, I have house hacks where they stay for 3 years because the rooms are huge and they're spacious and they have private bathrooms. Well, if you get these more brother-sister style rooms, then they're probably going to leave within 6 months to a year, and you're looking at faster turnovers, which can be a little bit annoying for you in your business, especially as you move forward. Now, the fourth thing you really got to think about is the fact that if you were 100% leveraged or 95% leveraged on a property, that means refinancing down the road will mean a larger down payment for you. Remember, as soon as you convert this house into an investment property, you're going to get higher interest rates, and then you need to have equity in the property. So obviously this doesn't apply for you if you actually did renovations on the home and created that equity and didn't try to cash out to, make it the gap lessen in size. So obviously for those of you who are doing it the right way, I would say yes, house hack and do renovations. But if you are not, and you are just simply doing it the more easy way, which I do advise for most people because many people are not familiar with renovations, then you're just buying the home as is, already renovated, and therefore the value in your house is already stretched to a point where you're going to need that down payment if you ever want it to become with a commercial loan with a private institution, maybe a community bank or such. Now, some of you out there are probably thinking about debt to income ratios when it comes to these rooming houses or, all these other different houses. The best part is you get to use the income from your house in your debt to income, like, the whole equation of whether or not you can buy another house in the future. Oftentimes, especially if you're doing a rooming house or if you're properly doing a triplex, maybe you've rented out the part that you used to live in, then you're making plenty of income to cover the mortgage, and therefore you can buy another home. The problem comes in reporting it on your taxes and how many leases you send to the bank. Remember, if they think you're living there, then you don't want to send an equivalent number of leases to the rooms that you have in the house, because now that suddenly suggests the idea that you're not living there. Also, reporting it on your taxes. Some of you may know that reporting your taxes on a primary residency loan is a lot like reporting your taxes on your eBay sales. Many of you may not want to do it. So let me be real with you here. You might want to reconsider that. If you do not report your primary residency income on your tax returns, then when it comes time to buy a next house, they're not going to ask you for your leases or your bank statements for proof of income. They're actually going to go off of your tax returns of the previous year. So any of you who skimped out on this might notice that you have a hard time proving you make as much as you do. Now, number 6 is really important to the city of Baltimore. Yes, I want to make this a little bit Baltimore-centric. As you know, I invest in Baltimore City, and that is these older homes are utility nightmares. I mean, a lot of times these homes basically just expel AC and heat in the house. They're not very well insulated. They have older furnaces, older systems. Maybe the windows are a lot older and therefore don't retain as much. So they're not as really well designed as these newer modern homes. So if you get a new build house, you won't have this issue with utilities. But if you get an older one, your utility bill will be huge. Now here's the thing. you may be inclined to say, okay, I'm going to give the utilities to my tenants. I'm just going to allocate that, so I'm not really going to care about that. But you might run into a lot of problems doing that. And I'm going to go over a very quick list, but I've got a lot more than this. So for instance, when tenants often are using different variable amounts of utilities, you can create arguments and tension in the house. So what if, Johnny over here happens to be leaving his lights on all the time and leaving on the shower for an hour on end? Samantha's really not going to enjoy the fact that she's paying for the utilities of this other person. What if they go on vacation? They'll go off to vacation and say, well, I didn't use utilities that month. Now you might just say, well, everyone's got to pay it even no matter what, but then you may run into other issues. Utility bills come out at different times in the month. So if it comes out on the 18th of a month, you may have it where someone moves into the house and they don't really know how much utilities they're actually supposed to pay. You could prorate this, of course. This leads to more math on your part. You also have an issue of when they move out. Should you hold and reserve $100 for utilities? Maybe the security deposit, you can try to use it, but honestly, it really doesn't work that way. You can't use a security deposit on non-payment of utilities. It's not considered part of the rent, and so therefore it doesn't apply. So ultimately, once they've moved out of the house on the 18th of the next month, do you try to recover that money, or do you just send it back to them? This can create a wide variety of issues, and especially if you have certain portions of the house not using certain portions of the utilities. Let's say you have a person in a basement or an attic and using a mini split, they're probably not using the gas from a furnace. So I've often found that splitting utilities and having the divvy up amongst everyone has just created nothing but problems and just a little bit more maintenance nightmares for me. So I have decided to go on the route of just simply all-inclusive. It even sounds more attractive in my listings anyway, and therefore I have to factor in these utility costs, and they are part of my overhead. So just note that some of these newer builds might be better for that, but some of these older builds, you might have utility issues. Now, what you can do to get around that is to actually call BGE. This is a utility company in the local Baltimore area. They actually have auditors who will go out to the home and they will survey the home and tell you how you can make it more energy efficient. Even better is they will actually pay you to do this. BGE has a vested interest in you not using as much utilities as you are. That's why they charge more and more depending on how much usage you have. Well, if they come in there with these auditors, they'll go in there and they'll generally give you from $2,000 to $8,000 just to make these renovations. You do have to use these auditors in order to make the renovations, but I am actually in the process of using one like that, and I will tell you how that goes. So if you are interested, let me know in the comment section below, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And the seventh and final pitfall I've seen people walk into in Baltimore is that Airbnb strategy. So many of you want to use Airbnbs to supplement maybe a basement side of your house, but it's legally zoned as a single family home. The entire house is. So you're going to try to use Airbnb while you live there, and that's perfectly fine. Baltimore doesn't have an issue with it. But once you move out of that house, suddenly it's illegal. And so you're going to have to keep that in mind when you're factoring in your move out strategy. House hacking is fantastic for getting in the house. And actually, if you intend to live there long term, this is not really an issue. But if you ever intend to move out and collect houses like I do with low down payment residency loans, then you will just have to understand that your Airbnb will be illegal in the future, and you have to know how to get around that. Now, if you're investing outside of Baltimore City, then you're just going to need to look up your local Airbnb laws. I actually have a home in the southern Maryland of PG County area near DC, and in this, I do intend to use an Airbnb when I move out, and I have to factor this into my equation. So subscribe below if you learned anything new today. Definitely make sure to like this video and let me know if you want me to go into any more details on house hacking. I'm becoming a bit of an expert on this subject, so I will talk to you all very soon with any questions you might have.